HOA Karen slapped my pregnant wife, didn't know she's a federal lawyer's wife. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. It was one of those crisp, golden mornings you only get in early fall. The kind where the air feels just a little cooler than expected and the sunlight filters softly through the red and orange leaves. The kind of morning that makes you feel like everything in the world is in its right place. Nestled on the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac sat the Willow Creek subdivision, a neat grid of manicured lawns, beige siding, and picture-perfect driveways. The community looked like it had been plucked straight out of a real estate brochure. Everything about it seemed calm, controlled, and just a little too perfect. But perfection, as it turns out, has a cost. This was the kind of neighborhood that took its homeowners association very seriously. Rules weren't just guidelines here, they were gospel. Grass could only be 2 inches tall. Trash cans had to be brought in by 10 a.m. sharp. Even the color of your front door had to be approved by a committee. They called it preserving property value. Most residents just called it dealing with the HOA. That morning, a moving truck rumbled quietly onto Elmwood Lane, breaking the otherwise still silence. It parked in front of a modest, 2-story home near the corner. A woman stepped out of the passenger side. Her name was Vanessa. 31, 7 months pregnant, and still glowing from the excitement of a new chapter. She wore an oversized hoodie, one hand on her lower back, the other shielding her eyes from the sun as she looked at her new home. She and her husband, Daniel, had just bought the house a week ago. It was meant to be a peaceful place to settle down before the baby came. Somewhere calm. Somewhere safe. Somewhere quiet. She had no idea what she was walking into. Across the street, behind lace-curtained windows, someone was watching. Karen. Mid-50s. Always dressed like she was on her way to a homeowners meeting even when she wasn't. She didn't officially hold a title in the HOA anymore, but that didn't stop her from acting like she did. She had a clipboard. Always. She took morning walks not for the exercise, but to inspect. Lawn too dry? Write it down. Halloween decorations up too early? Take a photo. She once left a note on someone's mailbox because the flag was slightly crooked. And now she saw the moving truck. The unfamiliar vehicle. The pregnant woman stepping out in worn sneakers and leggings. No name badge. No visible parking permit. A crime in Karen's eyes. Karen's lips tightened. She squinted harder, peering out through her blinds. She didn't recognize this woman. And in Willow Creek, not being recognized meant not being trusted. Without another thought, Karen grabbed her clipboard and headed outside. Not to welcome, not to introduce herself, but to enforce. Vanessa hadn't even finished her morning tea when she remembered she'd left her overnight bag in the trunk. The one with her prenatal vitamins, her water bottle, and the folder with all the doctor's appointment paperwork she needed for the next day. She figured it'd be a quick trip down to the car, back up in 5 minutes, no big deal. She grabbed her keys, slipped on her flip-flops, and made her way outside. The street was calm, as always. Not a sound except for the distant hum of lawnmowers and the faint rustle of leaves. She walked down the driveway, hand resting on her belly as she moved, and made her way toward the side parking area. Now, there weren't any no parking signs. No painted lines. No curb markings. Just a clean strip of pavement next to the neighborhood park, usually empty except on weekends. It looked public. Open. Harmless. So that's where she had parked the night before. She was 9 months pregnant, tired, and the driveway was full from the moving truck. It made sense. As she popped the trunk and leaned in to grab her bag, a sharp voice rang out behind her. "Excuse me. Ma'am." Vanessa turned around slowly, caught off guard. Karen was already halfway across the street, marching like she had the full weight of law behind her. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her head, and an expression like someone had just insulted her landscaping. "That spot is not for public use," Karen said, her tone clipped and high. "You can't just park wherever you feel like. This is not a Walmart." Vanessa blinked. Confused. "I didn't see any signs." "I thought it was open," she said calmly. Karen scoffed. "It's not your job to think, sweetheart. We have rules here. Rules that everyone is expected to follow, no matter how." She looked Vanessa up and down. "New you are." Vanessa felt the shift immediately. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, protective now. "I just parked there last night because the movers were using the driveway," she explained. "I'm sorry if that was an issue. I was just trying to grab something from my car." Karen took another step forward, now fully in Vanessa's space. Her voice rising. "People like you come into this neighborhood and think the rules don't apply. Well, let me tell you something." She pointed a finger inches from Vanessa's chest. "I am the rules around here. And if you think you can disrespect this community, you're in for a rude awakening." Something in her voice cracked, years of pent-up control, maybe, or just the thrill of someone to boss around. Vanessa started to back away, but Karen stepped closer. Too close. I don't need this right now, Vanessa muttered, trying to turn back toward her trunk. But then it happened. A flash. A hand. A sharp sting on the side of her cheek. Karen had slapped her. Not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough that time seemed to freeze. The sound echoed down the empty street, louder than it had any right to be. A bird flew out of a nearby tree. A window curtain twitched across the street. Vanessa stood still, her hands slowly rising to her face. The pain wasn't even the worst part, it was the shock. The disbelief. She couldn't speak. And for the first time in a long while, Karen looked unsure of what she'd just done. Daniel had only been gone 15 minutes. He'd run out to grab breakfast, just some bagels and decaf coffee from the corner shop 2 miles down the road. It was supposed to be a quiet, easy start to their day. They were still settling in, boxes half unpacked, furniture waiting for a second coat of polish, and his wife, his very pregnant, very exhausted wife, hadn't slept well in days. He pulled into the driveway just as he saw the 2 figures across the street. At first glance, it didn't register. But then he saw Vanessa frozen, one hand to her cheek, her eyes wide and wet. He was out of the car before the engine even cut off. Vanessa. She turned her head slowly at the sound of his voice, still stunned. Her lips moved, but no words came out. And standing in front of her, with that same damn clipboard and a look of self-righteous fury still plastered across her face, was Karen. Daniel's steps quickened. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, voice sharp but calm, the kind of calm that usually made people nervous. Karen didn't flinch. In fact, she turned toward him like she was about to lodge yet another complaint. "Your wife was trespassing on HOA property," she said, jabbing the air with her pen. "She parked where she shouldn't have, and when I tried to explain the rules, she got defensive. I don't care how pregnant she is, eh?" Daniel raised his hand slightly. Not aggressively, just enough to stop the rant. "Wait," he said quietly. "You laid a hand on her?" Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. It was barely a yes or no." She hesitated. "Just for a second." "She was being rude," Karen said instead. "And if you think new residents can just waltz in here and ignore the rules." Daniel stepped in front of his wife now, standing between them. Not shouting. Not threatening. Just watching her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice even lower now, calm in the most unsettling way. "Do you have any idea who you just assaulted?" Karen scoffed. "Assault? Don't be dramatic. And no, I don't care who she is. Nobody's above the rules, I don't care if she's the mayor's daughter." Daniel's jaw tensed just slightly. "I'm Daniel Green. I'm her husband," he said. "And I'm a federal civil rights attorney, specializing in HOA overreach and unlawful harassment." Karen blinked. "I've represented cases that made national headlines," he continued, taking one small step closer. "I've taken down entire HOA boards for a lot less than what just happened here today. And now you've put your hands on a pregnant woman, my wife, on record in front of witnesses." Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Daniel looked down briefly, exhaled once through his nose, then looked back up at her. "You might want to stop talking now. For your sake." Karen's face drained of all color. By the next morning, the silence in Willow Creek had shifted. It wasn't the usual calm anymore, it was heavy. Tense. Like the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Word had spread fast. Some neighbors had seen the slap. Others had only heard about it through the grapevine. And though nobody was brave enough to knock on Vanessa's door, a few slowed their walks as they passed by. Some paused a little too long while pretending to pick up their mail. The ones who had their own stories about Karen suddenly found themselves thinking, finally. Daniel had wasted no time. Less than 24 hours after the incident, the formal paperwork was in motion. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make threats. He didn't need to. He knew the system better than anyone, and this time it was personal. The lawsuit named both the HOA and Karen individually: assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, harassment, and negligence on the part of the HOA for failing to properly supervise a self-appointed enforcer. The HOA board tried to meet with him privately. They offered a lukewarm apology, tried to smooth things over with vague statements like miscommunication and "we didn't authorize her to confront anyone." But Daniel had heard it all before. He'd built his career on untangling these kinds of situations where boards looked the other way until someone got hurt. Within a week, local media picked up the story. The headline ran, "Pregnant woman slapped by HOA enforcer, turns out her husband's a federal civil rights attorney." And once that article hit the wire, everything changed. National blogs picked it up next. A popular law podcast did an entire episode on it. One news segment even tracked down past HOA complaints from other residents, surfacing years of petty citations, unfiled appeals, and one particularly bizarre incident involving holiday lights being declared offensively bright. Suddenly, Willow Creek's perfect image started to crack. Karen, meanwhile, was served with a restraining order and had to appear in court for assault charges. Her lawyer tried to argue provocation, stress, misunderstanding, but the footage from a neighbor's Ring camera, which caught everything, left little room for interpretation. The slap was clear. The aggression before it was undeniable. The HOA scrambled. Emergency board meetings were called. Lawyers were hired. Statements were drafted and redrafted. By the end of the month, Karen was formally banned from participating in any HOA enforcement activity. The board issued a public apology and, under pressure, announced mandatory training for all members on resident rights, conflict de-escalation, and non-discriminatory conduct. A quiet review of their policies was launched. Fines were paused. Appeal processes were made more transparent. For the first time in years, the board actually listened when residents spoke. Not because they wanted to, but because now they had to. At first, it was subtle. A few extra nods from neighbors during morning walks. A warm smile from a woman 2 doors down who hadn't made eye contact before. Then someone left a small bouquet on Vanessa's porch, no note, just flowers in a mason jar. She hadn't even unpacked her kitchen yet, but the gesture made her pause. By the end of that week, she wasn't just being noticed, she was being heard. An older man named George from down the street stopped by one afternoon while Daniel was pulling weeds in the front yard. He leaned on his cane and said, "That woman's been doing this for years." People just stopped speaking up. He glanced toward Karen's house, then shook his head. "But good on you. Someone finally put her in her place." After George, it was Alyssa, the single mom from around the corner, who shared how Karen once reported her for having her teenage son's basketball hoop on the sidewalk for extended periods. Then came Carlos, who'd been fined 3 times for his work van being parked in his own driveway after hours, despite the fact that he worked overnight shifts and had nowhere else to park. Stories poured in, one after another. People started realizing they weren't the only ones who'd felt bullied or nitpicked. They just never thought anything could be done about it. The pressure grew and the HOA couldn't ignore it anymore. Flyers went out for an emergency community meeting, officially labeled a discussion on neighborhood relations and HOA practices. But everyone knew what it was really about. Folding chairs filled the rec center room faster than anyone expected. Residents, many of whom had never attended an HOA meeting before, showed up with notes, questions, and frustration. Daniel didn't come in swinging. He didn't have to. He sat near the back with Vanessa, who was resting her feet on a second chair, sipping from a bottle of water while people took turns standing and speaking their truth. One woman choked up talking about the time she was cited for planting non-compliant tulips, even though they were a gift from her late husband. A man in a polo shirt recounted the time he was warned over having too many guests during his daughter's graduation weekend. It was clear this wasn't about one slap anymore. That moment had simply cracked open a door people had been trying to push against for years. Residents began demanding transparency, asking why HOA board members could enforce rules without checks, why appeals were so hard to file, and why certain people seemed targeted more than others. Someone even suggested term limits for board members. Another proposed rotating enforcement roles to avoid unofficial watchdogs taking over. For the first time, the room wasn't quiet. It wasn't polite, but it was honest. And in that honesty, something started to shift, not just in the policy, but in the people. A few weeks later, the days started feeling slower again. The kind of slow that Vanessa had been hoping for when they first moved in, the soft lull of routine, quiet evenings on the porch, the occasional hello from passing neighbors who no longer looked the other way. The bruising on her cheek had faded, but the memory hadn't. It lingered in small moments, when she hesitated before walking alone to the mailbox, or when she paused a second longer before answering the door. But there was something else that had taken root, too, something stronger than fear. Resilience. She and Daniel had talked about it one night while sitting on the back deck. The sun was dipping low, washing the sky in amber and soft gold. She was curled up under a blanket with her hand resting on her belly, and he had his laptop closed for once. "This isn't how we plan things," she said quietly. "No," Daniel replied, "but I think it's how things needed to happen." They'd come to Willow Creek looking for peace, not a fight. But the fight had found them, and in facing it, they uncovered something unexpected. a community that had been quietly waiting for change. The HOA, after weeks of pressure, had finally begun implementing real steps forward. They brought in third-party consultants to train board members on de-escalation, non-biased enforcement, and homeowner rights. Monthly reports were made public, and for the first time, there was a formal feedback channel that didn't end in silence or fines. Karen had gone silent after the court appearance. Her house was still there. Same curtains, same potted plants, but her clipboard had disappeared, and the neighborhood seemed to breathe a little easier because of it. More residents began showing up to HOA meetings, not just to complain but to participate. Proposals were being made, not just shot down. A dad in a wheelchair asked to review sidewalk accessibility rules. A teenager volunteered to redesign the HOA website to make policies easier to read. People were finally being heard. Vanessa still had to take it easy most days. The baby kicked more when she got worked up, which Daniel liked to joke was a sign she'd be a lawyer like her dad. But sometimes, after dinner, they'd walk slowly along the sidewalk, just the two of them, hands intertwined. People would wave. Some would nod in quiet respect. Others would stop and say, "Thanks, really." And each time Vanessa would smile, soft, tired, but steady. Spring came early the next year. The trees in Willow Creek bloomed in gentle shades of pink and white, and the grass came in a little greener than usual. Lawns still looked tidy, but now there were more chairs on porches, more neighbors waving at each other from across driveways. The air felt lighter, not just because of the season, but because something had shifted beneath the surface. The neighborhood had changed, not in the dramatic way some people expect when they hear the word reform. There were still rules, still quiet hours, still the same beige siding and neatly trimmed hedges. But now there were conversations. Monthly HOA meetings weren't empty anymore. They were lively, thoughtful, even hopeful. New faces showed up, asked questions, suggested improvements. The board had expanded to include residents who had once felt shut out. Voting procedures were adjusted to give every homeowner a say, not just those who'd been around the longest or spoke the loudest. And the policies? They were clearer, kinder. There were guidelines now for how enforcement should be handled, with empathy, with consistency, and above all, with fairness. Residents were no longer afraid of a warning letter in their mailbox or an anonymous complaint about the wrong flower pot. More importantly, people had started to see their neighborhood not just as a place to live, but as something they were responsible for shaping. Vanessa saw it, too. From her front window, she watched kids ride their bikes in the cul-de-sac, laughing in the late afternoon sun. She watched Mr. George waving from his porch swing, and Alyssa chatting with Carlos as their kids drew chalk dinosaurs on the sidewalk. She stood there, holding her daughter in one arm, tiny, warm, peaceful, and thought back to that first morning, to the slap, the shock, the fear. It had felt like the world collapsing in. But now, standing in the soft light of a new day, she realized it had actually been something else entirely. A beginning, not one they would have chosen, but one that revealed what mattered most. Strength that doesn't need to shout, courage born from protecting the people you love, and the quiet, steady power of simply standing your ground.